Have you ever stood in a room where no one saw you? Where you existed, worked, breathed, gave your best, and still felt invisible? That was Nylia's life inside the walls of Westhall Estates. Have you ever worked so hard, hoping someone would notice, just once, not to praise you, but to finally see you? Nylia wasn't after love. She just wanted a better life. But what happened behind those marble columns set off a chain of events that changed everything, especially for her son. So, what would you do if the man who never noticed you came back years later with a marriage contract in hand? Savannah's summers could melt steel, but the halls of Westhall Estate always remained cool. Too cool. That place had more silence than sound. Heavy portraits lined the corridors. Velvet curtains swallowed daylight. And for a 23-year-old woman like Nylia Grant, hired to keep things spotless, the mansion felt less like a workplace and more like a castle she'd never belong in. She remembered the interview like it was yesterday. You'll keep to the guest rooms, avoid contact with Mr. Langston, and wear clean whites every morning, the house manager had said. Her voice clipped. No perfume. No idle conversation. And if you ever run into Mr. Langston, don't speak unless spoken to. Nylia nodded, hands clenched on her folded resume. Her heart pounded, but her eyes stayed calm. She needed this job. Rent was due. Her grandmother's medicine wasn't cheap. Dreams of community college had already slipped through her fingers, but this was a paycheck and a way to keep standing. So she said yes to everything. And that's how she ended up mopping marble floors, while billionaire Dorian Langston walked past without so much as a glance. Dorian Langston, 34, CEO of Langston Biotech. A man with sharp suits, sharper words, and no time for nonsense. He was built like a man who had wrestled with life and won. Tall, well-structured, expression fixed like stone. He was the type who walked fast and spoke like every second cost money. Nylia had only ever seen him in passing. Once at the stairwell, once in the study, and once, when she was scrubbing a spill in the entry hall, their eyes briefly met. He didn't say a word, didn't smile, didn't nod, but that moment lingered in her mind longer than it should have. The mansion bustled the night of the Langston Foundation Gala. Politicians, doctors, entrepreneurs, servers raced around with champagne trays while a string quartet played by the garden windows. Nylia was scheduled for post-event cleanup, along with 2 other housekeepers. She stayed out of sight as instructed. When the final guest left, it was past midnight. She changed back into her uniform, tied her hair up, and started clearing wine glasses from the east wing. That's when she heard it. The study door creak open. She turned slowly, expecting the butler. Instead, it was Dorian. He looked tired. His jacket hung open, tie loosened, a half-empty tumbler of something brown in one hand. Nylia froze. He looked at her, actually looked at her. "You're not supposed to be in here, are you?" he asked, voice low. Nylia swallowed. "I'm scheduled to clean this section, sir." He didn't nod, didn't move. "Do you like working here?" She blinked. "It's a job, sir. Not what I asked." There was a beat of silence. She studied his face, not like a girl who watched rich men on television, but like someone who had cleaned up after them long enough to know when something was broken. "No," she answered finally. "I don't like it, but I need it." Dorian chuckled, not loud, a breath more than a sound. "That's the first honest thing I've heard tonight." They talked and talked about things that weren't supposed to be shared between a maid and a billionaire. He told her about his father, how he built Langston Biotech from scratch, and how cancer took him before he could enjoy retirement, about how success was lonely, and how every smile at the gala felt rehearsed. Nylia talked about her mother's death, her grandmother's lessons, how her dream wasn't riches, but peace. He listened, intently, quietly, and with something human in his eyes. Then something shifted. He reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, his fingers brushed her cheek. uncertain like a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle. "I shouldn't," he whispered. "You won't remember this tomorrow," she replied, more to herself than to him, but she let him kiss her anyway. And when they finally pulled apart, heartbeats loud in the quiet, she wasn't thinking about titles, wealth, or mistakes. She was thinking about being seen, even if just for one night. The next morning, the mansion felt colder. Dorian was gone. She didn't see him at breakfast or later that week. 3 days later, she was called into the manager's office. "We appreciate your service, Miss Grant," the woman said, eyes blank. "But we're restructuring our staff." No warning, no write-up, just silence. Nylea packed her things, left through the side gate. She didn't cry until she was halfway home. 6 weeks later, her stomach turned at the smell of eggs. She threw up twice in one morning and stared at 2 pink lines in disbelief. She was pregnant. What would you do if the man who dismissed you left a child behind without ever knowing? Tell us in the comments. Like this story so we know you want more. And if you've ever kept a secret to protect your child, subscribe. You're not alone. Nylea's shoes echoed on the cracked pavement outside her grandmother's duplex in East Savannah. She hadn't told her yet about the firing, the pregnancy, or the way her life had flipped in silence. It was too early to explain anything. But by week 8, the signs were undeniable. The nausea hit like clockwork. Fatigue clung to her bones. And she cried over things she used to ignore. Spilled juice, late buses, stray dogs looking lost. When her grandmother noticed her skipping meals, she asked straight out, "Is there something I should know, Nylea?" Nylea didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, then whispered, "I'm pregnant." Her grandmother didn't blink. "Do you want to keep it?" "Yes." "Then we work with what we have." That was it. No lectures, no guilt, just love. Nylea took a second job at a diner off Victory Drive. Long hours, sore feet, and tips barely enough to matter. But she held on to that job and picked up private housecleaning gigs on the weekends. She didn't speak Dorian Langston's name again, not even once, because saying it out loud made it real, and it wasn't just about shame. It was about the fear that somehow, in some twisted way, speaking him back into her life would ruin the small peace she was building. By the time she entered her 3rd trimester, she'd stopped checking business news, stopped Googling Langston Biotech, stopped wondering if he even remembered her. Instead, she focused on the baby boy kicking inside her and the life she was preparing for him, without a father, without fanfare. She gave birth on a rainy afternoon in Charleston. No one held her hand, no cameras, no family beside her except for her grandmother, who stood by her bed, silent and steady. The doctor handed her the baby, and Nylea cried harder than she ever had in her life. Elijah. She whispered the name before anyone else had the chance to suggest another. And when his tiny eyes blinked up at her, stormy, grey and familiar, her heart fractured in a new way. She saw Dorian in his son, not in his money, not in his reputation, but in his expression, that guarded intensity like the world was already asking too much of him. Raising Elijah wasn't easy. She worked nights while her grandmother watched him. She studied early childhood books during her breaks. She tried, often failed, then tried again. But Elijah smiled. A lot. And that smile rewired something in her. She didn't hate Dorian. Not anymore. She simply let go. Whatever their night had meant, it didn't define her. What defined her was every scraped knee she bandaged, every warm meal she made. With little, and every night she stayed up so Elijah could sleep without worry. She'd built a small cleaning business by the time Elijah turned 3. She and her friend Tisha, both single moms, ran Spark and Shine, offering affordable residential cleaning to Charleston's north side. They weren't rich, but they had enough. Enough to survive, enough to smile, enough to keep their kids clean, fed, and loved. At Elijah's 4th birthday, a boy at daycare asked, "Where's your daddy?" Nylea froze as Elijah turned to her. He shrugged. I don't know. But Mommy makes great cupcakes. She kissed him that night and cried into her pillow after he fell asleep. By 6, Elijah started to ask more questions. Why don't I have a dad? Was he nice? Do I have his eyes? Nylia answered the best she could. Some people are meant to come into your life for a moment. But your life, it's mine now. He never questioned her love. But the gaps in his story hung like shadows in their home. And then came the accident. It was a rainy Friday afternoon. A substitute driver took a sharp turn. Elijah hit his head on the window. Not serious, but serious enough to send him to the emergency room for observation. Nylia ran from work with Tisha driving. By the time she got to the hospital, Elijah was stable, but the paperwork, the insurance, became the bigger emergency. She had a state plan. Nothing fancy. But the hospital needed verification, needed co-payments, needed what she didn't have. And as she stood at the front desk, gripping Elijah's hand, swallowing panic, something shifted in her chest. Not desperation, clarity. Something had to change. The call came 5 days later. She almost didn't answer it. Hi, is this Miss Grant? Yes. This is Alicia from Langston Biotech. We're calling regarding a recent background check submitted for a cleaning contract proposal. Her heart skipped. I'm sorry? It flagged your name. There's a note here requesting an in-person verification before we proceed. Would you be available Monday morning? Nylia didn't know what she agreed to. She didn't sleep that night, didn't tell her grandmother, didn't breathe right until she walked into that office 3 days later. Langston Biotech looked like a glass mountain, polished, intimidating, inhospitable. She waited in the reception area for 12 minutes before the elevator opened. And then, there he was, Dorian, in a grey suit, no tie, sharp as ever. But the moment their eyes met, his stopped being sharp. They softened, flickered, froze. He didn't say her name, didn't sit, didn't pretend it was business as usual. He only asked, "Is he mine?" Nylia gripped the straps of her purse. She should have lied, should have run, but instead she said, "Yes." They didn't speak again for 2 weeks, until he showed up on her doorstep in Charleston with a contract in his hand. Nylia stared at the crisp white envelope on her kitchen table. It was thick, too thick for a casual offer. Sealed with a black and gold Langston Biotech insignia. Her hands hovered above it for what felt like hours, heart pounding like a fist against her chest. Dorian Langston had found her. Again, and this time he wasn't asking. He was offering, or was it demanding? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that the moment he saw Elijah, his son, a storm had passed through his gaze. It wasn't rage. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, something she couldn't name. And now this contract sat in front of her like a line in the sand. She didn't open it that day. Instead, she picked Elijah up from school, made boxed macaroni for dinner, and listened as he excitedly talked about a science project he was building with his best friend, Zane. He had no idea that the man he'd met, the tall, serious stranger with the same storm-colored eyes, was more than just someone from Mummy's past. No idea that the life he knew was hanging in a delicate balance. Nylia tucked him in and sat beside him longer than usual, brushing his curls back and humming softly. She prayed, as she always did, for wisdom. And then she went back to the table and opened the envelope. It wasn't long, just 3 pages. The language was cold, clinical, written by someone who thought affection was a liability. This agreement, if accepted, will bind Miss Nylia Grant and Mr. Dorian Langston in a legal marital union for a period of 24 months. The rest outlined expectations, residence, public appearances, media handling, and a non-disclosure clause that made Nylia wince. But it wasn't the contract that shook her. It was the attached note, handwritten in black ink on Langston stationery. You deserved better than silence. I can't erase the past, but I can provide for him, for you. This isn't pity. It's responsibility. Meet me Friday. Let's talk, if nothing else. Friday came quickly. Too quickly. She traveled to Atlanta on a borrowed bus pass, dropped Elijah with her cousin, and sat at a corner table in a sleek restaurant Dorian had reserved privately. He was already there. No entourage, no lawyers, just him, staring out the window like the city made him anxious. When he saw her, he stood. She didn't speak, didn't sit. Why? She asked bluntly. Because he's mine. That didn't matter before. It does now. Nylia folded her arms. You think money solves everything? No, but access to healthcare, education, a stable future? Those are things I can give him that you're breaking yourself trying to provide. She flinched. Because he wasn't wrong, but she hated the way he said it. Like she was failing. Like her sacrifices were a weakness. Don't act like this is noble, she said. I'm not, he replied. This isn't about redemption, this is business. And business requires stability, family. I need a wife, you need security. It's an exchange. Her hands trembled, but she held his gaze. Security shouldn't come with a contract. He leaned forward. Then call it a trade. You give Elijah legitimacy. I give him everything else. She walked out that night, without saying yes. But not without thinking about it. All the way back to Charleston. The next week she got a notice. Her lease wouldn't be renewed. The landlord had sold the unit. They had 60 days to move out. Her grandmother's health had worsened. More dizzy spells, shorter walks, longer naps. The cleaning business had lost 2 clients. Nylia stood in the shower, cold water hitting her back, and whispered, God, I don't know what to do anymore. That night, she signed the contract. But she added her own clause in handwriting. Elijah's custody, care, and education decisions will remain shared. Any violation ends this agreement immediately. She slid it into a new envelope. No return note. Just her signature. And her pride sealed inside. Dorian sent a car the next day. Not a sleek one, a quiet one. A driver who didn't ask questions. A hotel room booked for the weekend. Clothes laid out with tags still on them. She didn't touch them. She spent the next 2 days planning Elijah's transition, transferring his school records, finding a new pediatrician in Atlanta. She packed slowly, taking only what mattered. And on Monday morning she told her son, we're going to live somewhere new, with someone who wants to help. Is he my dad? Elijah asked. Nylia nodded. Yes. And I need you to be brave with me, okay? Elijah didn't cry. He didn't jump for joy either. But he hugged her hard, long, and said, okay. Their wedding was 3 days later. Nylia didn't cry at the courthouse. She didn't smile either. It was a Wednesday morning. Overcast skies, cold air, the kind that reminded her of long shifts and silent bus rides. She stood beside Dorian in a grey wool dress, the one provided by his assistant, and signed her name with a firm, silent stroke. There were no flowers, no guests, no vows, just a judge, a stack of papers, and 2 people bound by law, not love. Dorian stood still, hands clasped, posture straight. He didn't touch her, didn't look at her, until the final signature was done, and the judge said, Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Langston. Then, and only then, did Dorian glance her way. His expression wasn't soft or proud. It was unreadable, like this was another deal closed, another document filed, another box checked. The driver opened the car door. Nylia stepped in first, Elijah seated between them. The boy looked from one adult to the other and back again. Are we a family now? Elijah asked. Dorian paused. We're working on it. Nylia stared ahead. That night, they moved into the penthouse of Langston Tower, 34 floors above Atlanta's skyline. The city buzzed below them like a distant echo, muffled by the quiet of expensive things. Marble counters, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen bigger than their old apartment. Elijah ran through the halls like it was a playground. Nylia followed slowly, not touching anything. She'd never owned anything this nice. And none of it felt like hers. Dorian showed her the guest bedroom. "Your space," he said plainly. "You can decorate it however you want." Nylia nodded. He hesitated before adding, "I'll have a team come by tomorrow with options for Elijah's room. You could just ask what he likes." He looked at her. Would he answer me? He might. If you try. Their arrangement had rules. Public appearances, once a month. Photo ops. Coordinated through PR. Statements to media, pre-approved. Shared meals, optional. Sleep arrangements, separate. No pressure, no obligation, just performance. Nylia memorized the schedule like a script, attended etiquette coaching, met with a Langston media consultant who trained her on posture, eye contact, and how to answer questions without saying anything real. "Your job," the consultant said, "is to make him look like a family man, not a romantic, just reliable." Nylia smiled tightly. "I've been making men look better than they are for years." But Elijah didn't care about optics. He wanted to play. He wanted to show his dad his drawings. He wanted to know why people took pictures of them at lunch, and why they were in a magazine the next week under the headline, "Langston's Secret Family Revealed, Power Move or Redemption Arc." Nylia threw the magazine in the trash. Dorian didn't mention it. Their first public appearance as a couple was a fundraising gala at the Atlanta Medical Research Board. Nylia wore a black gown that Dorian's team selected. Dorian wore a tuxedo like it was armor. They posed, smiled, answered safe questions. Nylia told herself it was just 2 hours. But as they stood side by side, Dorian's hand hovering near her lower back, she could feel the tension in his silence. She glanced up once and caught him looking at her, not through her. He blinked, looked away, and she knew he remembered that night. Maybe not the warmth, but the weight of it. Back at the penthouse, Nylia untied her shoes in the hallway. "Thank you for showing up," Dorian said quietly. "I didn't do it for you." He nodded. "I know." She turned to go, but he added, "You held yourself well tonight. You're more than I remembered." Her spine stiffened. "You don't know me, Dorian." "I'm trying." She walked away, not because she was angry, but because she didn't want to start hoping. Days passed. Routine settled in. Dorian left early, came back late. Sometimes they crossed paths in the kitchen. Once, he made her coffee, just placed the mug on the counter and walked away. No words, but she drank it. And the next morning when she made a pot, she poured him a cup too. They didn't talk about it. One afternoon, Elijah had a stomach bug. Nylia spent the day cleaning up vomit, cooling his forehead and whispering lullabies between calls to the school nurse. Dorian came home at 8 p.m. and found her on the couch with Elijah curled against her. He didn't say a word, but he brought her water and left a small plush toy beside Elijah's pillow. It was the first gift. Not flashy, just thoughtful. That night, Nylia stood on the balcony alone, wrapped in a blanket. Dorian joined her. "I missed a lot," he said. "You missed everything." He nodded. She didn't say more, because if she kept talking, she might start telling him how it felt to give birth alone, how it felt to rock a crying baby at 3 a.m., how many jobs she worked to afford pediatric visits and shoes that fit. Instead, she just said, "Don't make promises you won't keep. I'm not here to lie." "Good. Then don't pretend this is something it's not." "I won't." They stood there in silence. And for the first time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Nylia didn't come to the city to become a wife. She came to survive. And motherhood had taught her that survival meant reinvention. Every day, in Charleston, she had built a rhythm. Wake before sunrise, prep Elijah's lunch, scrub a stranger's kitchen, nurse her grandmother when her knees gave out, repeat. But in Atlanta, the rhythm was hollow, too quiet, too polished. The penthouse didn't creak. The floorboards didn't whisper. Even the refrigerator hummed like it was afraid to be too loud. Nylia found herself looking for problems to fix. Loose fixtures, uneven rugs, dirty corners. But there was nothing out of place here. Except her. Dorian had arranged a full-time nanny, a polished woman named Brielle with a master's degree in child psychology and a schedule more rigid than a military base. Elijah didn't like her. "She doesn't laugh, Mummy." Nylia dismissed Brielle within the first week. "You hired her to manage him," Nylia told Dorian, "not to know him." He didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Would you prefer to choose someone?" "No. I'll take care of my son myself." "I just thought you'd want help." "I do, but I want help that respects my child, not someone who treats him like a case study." Dorian leaned back against the counter. Noted. With Brielle gone, Nylia created a new rhythm. Elijah woke with the sun. She made his breakfast. She learned the new bus routes. She walked him to school, even when cameras followed from across the street. Dorian's assistant offered to hire a PR firm to manage optics. Nylia said no. "My son doesn't need a narrative. He needs normal." One Thursday, Elijah came home with a class project. "Family tree," he beamed. Nylia paused, one hand frozen over the sink. "Do I put Dad's name?" he asked. She dried her hands slowly. "That's up to you, sweetheart." Elijah bit his lip. "Is he really my dad now?" She kneeled beside him. "Yes, he's your dad. No matter what happened before." Elijah smiled. "Okay, I'm gonna draw him in a suit." Nylia laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in weeks. And that night, she tucked his drawing into her journal when he wasn't looking. Later that weekend, she was cleaning out a storage closet in the hallway when she found a box labeled Langston. Personal. She didn't mean to pry. But the lid slid open in her hands. Inside were photographs, old ones. Dorian as a boy. A woman who looked like him. Sharp cheekbones, stern mouth. His father, presumably. Several photos of Westhall Estate under construction. And one photo of her, Nylia, taken during a holiday event, wiping down a table, eyes down, unaware. She froze. That photo wasn't public. It wasn't staged. It was quiet, personal. She hadn't known he kept it. She put everything back where it was, hands trembling. At dinner, she said nothing, but she watched him. Watched the way he asked Elijah about his schoolwork. Watched how he listened when Elijah talked about art class and volcano kits. Dorian wasn't warm, but he was trying. He offered dessert, told a corny joke, laughed when Elijah rolled his eyes. And Nylia realized something. This wasn't just performance, this was effort. Real effort. Later that night, when Elijah was asleep, Nylia found Dorian in the study, lights low, a file open in front of him. She knocked gently. He looked up. "Do you need something?" he asked. "No, I just wanted to say thank you." He blinked. "For what?" "For showing up." Dorian closed the file. "I'm late, but I'm here." Nylia stepped further into the room. "You weren't just late," she said softly. "You were absent, entirely." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he nodded once. "I know." And that simple acknowledgement softened something in her chest. The next morning he was gone before sunrise again. But a note sat on the counter. "Good luck with Elijah's presentation. Let me know how it goes." Nylia folded it in half and slipped it into the back of her journal. That day, Elijah stood in front of his class and presented his family tree. "This is my mom," he said proudly. "She's smart and strong and works harder than anyone." "This is my dad," he added, holding up a small drawing of Dorian. "He's learning." The teacher smiled. The kids clapped. Nylia fought back tears. Because that one word, learning, held more grace than she ever expected to hear from her son, and more than Dorian probably deserved. But sometimes grace came before growth, and Elijah had plenty of both. Nylia didn't expect warmth from Dorian, But that didn't stop it from creeping in. It started in the small things. Like the second coffee mug left on the counter, or the folded laundry she never asked for, or the gentle way he tucked Elijah's blanket back in when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. But it was real, and real was something she hadn't trusted in a long time. One evening, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain slammed the glass windows of the penthouse. Elijah, terrified of thunder, refused to sleep in his room. Nylea held him on the couch, whispering stories from her childhood, about how she used to count between lightning and thunder to know how close the storm was. Dorian walked in halfway through one of the stories. He didn't interrupt. He just sat across from them, quiet, listening. After a long pause, Elijah looked up and said, "Will you stay with us?" Dorian blinked, then nodded. And just like that, the three of them sat in the dark, one boy curled up between two people learning how to be parents. The next morning, Nylea expected things to go back to silence. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and found breakfast already made. Scrambled eggs, toast, blueberry pancakes, a little burnt, but made with care. Dorian stood there, spatula in hand, completely out of place and completely aware of it. "I don't usually do this," he muttered. Nylea smirked. "That's obvious." But she sat and ate, and for the first time in this strange arrangement, she felt something like peace. Not perfection. Just peace. Later that week, they attended a charity event for children's health research, one of Dorian's personal projects. He stood at the podium, delivering sharp lines and smooth statistics. But then he went off script. "I was raised in a home where love was structured," he said. "Measured. Traded." Nylea froze. "But recently, I've learned that love isn't always loud. It's sometimes quiet, consistent, earned. It's the lunchbox packed before sunrise, the late-night story, the silent support in the storm." People clapped. Nylea's heart thudded in her chest. He didn't say her name, but he didn't have to. That night, after Elijah had gone to sleep, they sat on the balcony. A habit. Now, one that neither of them acknowledged but both kept returning to. "You spoke like a father today," Nylea said. Dorian looked at her. "I'm still learning." "Elijah sees it." Dorian hesitated. "Do you?" Nylea didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "Why did you keep that photo of me?" He didn't flinch. "I kept a lot of things that didn't make sense back then. You were different, real. I was a maid. You were a woman who looked like she saw everything and judged nothing." Nylea exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, she let the wall around her heart crack, just a little. That weekend, Dorian surprised them both with something uncharacteristic. A Saturday with no meetings. He took Elijah to the museum, let him press every button in the science exhibit, bought him 2 overpriced keychains and ice cream he didn't finish. Nylea watched from a bench, heart softening. This man, the one who once disappeared without a word, was now standing in the gift shop, arguing over the price of a rubber dinosaur. Life was strange, but sometimes strangely beautiful. That night, Dorian found her in the kitchen, humming quietly while putting away dishes. "Elijah told me something today." "Oh?" he said. "Dad, I think you like Mummy now." Nylea turned, amused. "And what did you say?" "I told him. I'm starting to—" Silence hung between them, warm, not awkward. Nylea stepped closer. "Then maybe," she said, "you're finally learning what real things feel like." Dorian reached for her hand. She let him, not as a contract, not as an obligation, but as a maybe. And that was more than either of them had started with. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, for the sake of someone else? Nylea didn't just become a mother. She became a foundation. If you've ever made sacrifices for someone you love, drop A in the comments. Tell us what you had to let go of and what you gained. Like this video if Nylea's strength moved you. Subscribe to never miss a story that makes you feel seen. Share this with someone who's holding their world together quietly. Your story matters. And you are not invisible here. Nylia had always known the day would come, the day Dorian would look into Elijah's face and know exactly what he had missed. But she didn't think it would feel like this. Not so still. Not so quiet. Not so human. It happened on a Sunday. They were at the Botanical Garden, a private wing closed off for a corporate donor event. The air smelled like citrus and soil. Elijah wandered ahead, notebook in hand, sketching plants and insects with an excitement Nylia hadn't seen in weeks. Dorian walked a few paces behind them. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't talking business. He was watching Elijah. Really watching him. Every laugh, every frown, every question he asked. And when Elijah turned around to ask something, eyes bright, lips pursed in focus, Dorian stopped walking. Because there they were, his own eyes, looking back at him. Nylia saw it happen, saw the way Dorian froze mid-step. How he blinked hard, how his throat moved when he swallowed. Elijah didn't notice, but Nylia did. And in that one look, all the years of absence hit Dorian like a punch to the chest. Later that night, they sat in the living room. Elijah had gone to bed after a bath and a bedtime story Nylia read. Twice, once with all the voices and once again because he begged. She found Dorian at the window, holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. "I saw you today," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Elijah is something else." "Yes," she replied. "He always has been. I never saw myself in him before. You weren't looking." Now he turned. "That's fair." Nylia crossed her arms. "What did you expect? That he'd resent you?" "I thought I'd resent me." "And I was right." He moved closer. Not too close, but enough that she could see the weight behind his expression. "I've missed birthdays. First steps. The first time he said, 'Mom.' The first time he scraped his knee." Nylia held her chin up. "I bandaged him, held him through it. But I didn't tell him you existed, because you hadn't earned that." Silence passed between them. Then he asked, "What do I have to do to earn it now?" Nylia didn't answer right away, because she didn't know. There was no checklist for fatherhood, no formula for undoing 8 years of absence. But maybe, just maybe, there was a place to start. That week, Dorian rearranged his schedule. Not permanently, but he cleared 3 evenings, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. "Elijah time," he told his assistant. No one questioned him, and Nylia didn't ask what prompted it. But she noticed. On Tuesday, Dorian helped Elijah with math homework, even though it had been years since he'd done long division. On Thursday, he took Elijah to the bookstore and let him pick out 3 chapter books. One about space, one about a lonely dragon, and one about a kid who wanted to build robots. On Saturday, they baked cookies. Terribly. But they laughed. A lot. Nylia stayed back during most of it, observing, listening, and slowly, her anger began to dissolve. Not because Dorian had done enough to erase the past, but because he was finally doing something in the present. That Sunday they had dinner together, not as a requirement, not for the press, but because Elijah asked for it. Nylia cooked. Dorian set the table. Elijah drew a placemat for each of them. He placed the one labeled Mummy beside the window. Then one labeled Elijah in the center. And finally, one that read Dad. Not Dorian, not Mr. Langston. Dad, written in bold blue crayon. Nylia stared at it for a long time. And so did Dorian. But neither of them corrected it. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie. That night, when Elijah had gone to bed, Nylia stepped into the study where Dorian was reviewing company numbers. "He called you Dad today," she said. Dorian looked up slowly. "I know. You didn't flinch. I didn't deserve it. But I wanted to." Nylia leaned against the doorframe. "He gives his heart freely. But it's not because he's naive. It's because I've shown him what love without conditions looks like. Dorian stood, walked to the window, then turned to face her. I want to be the kind of man who deserves to be called Dad. Then start with being present, she said. The rest can come later. The next morning, Elijah came running into the kitchen, waving a drawing. It's us, he grinned. Nylia took the paper. 3 stick figures, a tall one in a suit, a smaller one with curls, and a woman with long hair. Over each head was a name. Mom, Dad, me. Dorian looked at it over her shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, something in his eyes broke open. Not regret, not guilt, but wonder. Because he never imagined he'd get this chance, and now that he had it, he wasn't letting go. Dorian wasn't used to being needed outside the boardroom. He was the kind of man who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, who controlled empires with spreadsheets and signatures. But none of that prepared him for the way Elijah tugged on his sleeve and said, "Dad, can you help me build a rocket?" He thought it was a metaphor. It wasn't. It was a literal cardboard rocket project for science class. Dorian sat at the dining table for nearly 2 hours that evening, covered in glue and glitter, while Elijah barked instructions with the confidence of a CEO. Nylia watched from the kitchen. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct either of them, because in that moment, her son and his father were finally in the same world. The next morning, Elijah proudly carried the rocket to school. Dorian offered to drive. Nylia almost said no out of habit. She'd always been the one to walk Elijah to class, to kiss his forehead at the gate, to wave until he disappeared into the building. But when Elijah said, "Can Dad come too?" she paused, then nodded. The 3 of them rode in silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something new. At the school gate, Elijah reached for Dorian's hand. He didn't hesitate. He held it tightly. Nylia watched, arms crossed against her chest, not coldly, but protectively. When Elijah finally let go and ran inside, Dorian turned to her. "I didn't know it would feel like that." "Like what?" "Like I mattered." Later that afternoon, Nylia stepped into the guest lounge of Langston Biotech for an unannounced visit. She wasn't there to make a scene. She didn't need to. She was there because she'd seen a news headline she hadn't expected. Langston Biotech. Rumors swirl about the CEO's sudden fatherhood. There was a blurry picture of her and Elijah taken outside the apartment complex 2 weeks ago. She didn't care about the gossip, but Elijah's face was public now, and that crossed a line. Dorian met her in his private office. The moment she stepped in, he stood. "I saw it," she said. "I've already contacted legal. We're pushing to remove it from every platform. Why wasn't I told?" "I was protecting Elijah." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't get to use protection as a shield." "You should have told me." He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just nodded. "You're right." Nylia sighed, the tension bleeding from her shoulders. "I'm not trying to control everything, Dorian, but I have a say. I've always had a say, and now I'm learning to listen." They sat down, talked like 2 people who finally understood the stakes weren't about money or media, but about trust. "I'm not asking for you to tell the world you love me," Nylia said. "I wouldn't lie," he replied. She blinked. "So, you don't?" Dorian exhaled. "I don't know what I feel yet, but I know this. I look forward to hearing your voice. I wait for Elijah's stories. And for the first time in years, I want to come home." She looked down at her hands. "That's something," she whispered. Later that evening, Dorian surprised Elijah with a basketball. "I figured we should try something low glue," he joked. Elijah grinned. They went to the rooftop court, one Dorian rarely used. Under soft lights and open sky, they played until Elijah tired out. Nylia joined them at the edge of the court. "Who won?" she asked. "I did!" Elijah shouted. "Dad's not good at defense." Dorian laughed. "I was letting him win." "You weren't," Elijah said quickly. They all laughed, and for a split second, It felt like they were a family by more than contract. That night, Nylia stood at the window again, arms folded over her chest. Dorian stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. "I wasn't built for this," he said. "Neither was I." "How did you learn?" "One mistake at a time." He looked over at her. "You've made fewer than I have." She turned her head slightly, eyes tired but open. "I've had more time." He nodded slowly. "Then give me time too." Nylia hesitated, then said the one thing she hadn't allowed herself to say before. "Okay." Nylia sat at the edge of the garden rooftop, her legs crossed, Elijah's notebook in her lap. She flipped through pages of drawings, rockets, stick-figure families, a castle with a roof too wide to be real. Her eyes paused on one page. 3 people holding hands. Elijah's handwriting labeled them clearly, me, Mommy, Dad. She closed the book gently and let out a breath that carried too much weight. That morning, Dorian had gone silent again. No notes, no texts, no breakfast mugs. It wasn't avoidance. She'd grown familiar with his moods. But something else. Like he was preparing for something. And she was right. At exactly 4:05 p.m., she was summoned to his office on the 40th floor. Not by him, but by his assistant. "Mr. Langston requested you join him. No rush, but he cleared his schedule for this." Nylia didn't say a word. But her heart moved faster than her footsteps. The office was dim. Golden hour light poured through glass walls. Dorian stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a folder on the desk behind him. He turned when she walked in. "Thanks for coming." "You're welcome," she replied carefully. He motioned for her to sit. She didn't. He didn't push. "I've been thinking," he started, "about the contract." Nylia's spine stiffened. "What about it?" "I want to change it." She crossed her arms. "Change it how?" "I want to make it optional. We can dissolve it now if you want. No strings. I'll still support Elijah no matter what. His care, his education, everything." Nylia blinked. This wasn't what she expected. "I thought this was about protecting your image," she said slowly. "It was," he admitted. "But now, it's about protecting you. And him. With or without the Langston name." Her voice came quiet. "What changed?" He stepped closer, his voice firm but low. "I watched you take a contract you didn't want. Move into a city you never planned for. Raise our son with discipline and grace. You didn't ask for help, but you accepted it anyway. You gave me access to something I never earned." Nylia held her breath. "And now," Dorian said, "I want to give you the freedom to choose. Stay or leave. Be my wife or don't. This time, it's not about the media. It's about us." Nylia sat slowly. Her voice came steady. "And what if I choose to walk away? Then, I'll respect it, but I'll still be there for Elijah." "And if I stay?" His gaze didn't move. "Then I'll spend every day proving I've learned how." They sat in silence, not hostile, not uncomfortable, just honest. Nylia lowered her eyes. "I don't trust this. I don't blame you. You left me once. I was afraid." "I was too." He nodded. "But you stayed brave. I didn't." Nylia stood, walked to the window, arms crossed over her chest. "The contract gave me security," she said. "But it didn't give me peace." "What gives you peace now?" Elijah's laughter. Dorian smiled softly. "It gives me that too." Later that evening, they ate dinner together. A quiet table, just the 3 of them. Elijah talked about his upcoming field trip to the aquarium. "Can Dad come too?" he asked between bites of baked chicken. Nylia looked up. So did Dorian. "Would you want me to?" he asked. Elijah shrugged. "Yeah, it's more fun when you're there." Dorian smiled. "Then I'm there." Nylia didn't interrupt, because for the first time, their son had asked his father to show up. And he had said yes without hesitation. After Elijah went to bed, Dorian approached her on the balcony with 2 mugs of tea. "I read your clause again last night. The one in the contract?" He nodded. "About shared custody and education." "I meant it," she said. "I know. And I agree." She took a sip. "I didn't write that because I thought you'd try to take him," she added. "I know that too. I wrote it so I'd remember that I'm still his mother, not a placeholder in your system." He looked at her, then said something she didn't expect. "You're not a placeholder. You're the foundation." They talked for hours that night, not about business, not about press, about childhoods, about regrets, about dreams that never got the space to grow. Nylea admitted she once wanted to study psychology. Dorian confessed he sometimes wondered what it would have been like to start a small business instead of running an empire. "I don't think you'd have survived small," Nylea teased. He smirked. "I'd have hated it, but it might have taught me patience sooner." She grinned. "Elijah's teaching you that now." "No, you are." At midnight, she stood to leave, but he reached for her wrist, gently. "I know I messed this up," he said. "But if you'd let me, I'd like a chance to start again. No contract, just us." Nylea didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Instead, she said, "Let's see what tomorrow looks like. If you show up, I'll keep showing up too." He nodded, and for him, that was enough. Dorian kept his word. The next morning, he was already dressed when Nylea entered the kitchen. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a plain navy sweater and dark jeans. It was the first time she'd seen him like that. Not polished, not rehearsed, just human. "I'll drop Elijah off today," he said, without looking up from the coffee machine. Nylea paused. "He's used to me walking him in. I'll wait in the car while you do. Just want to be there for the ride." She studied him for a moment. No smugness, no pretense, just a quiet offer to participate. She nodded once. "Okay." Elijah chatted the entire way to school about sea turtles, slime projects, and how he was going to win the best rocket prize even though no one said there was a contest. Dorian laughed more in that 10-minute ride than he had in entire press conferences. And when Elijah leaned forward to hug him before jumping out of the car, Dorian blinked fast, like something caught in his eye. Nylea saw it, but she didn't mention it. Later that day, Dorian called in from home. His assistant was shocked. The man who never missed a quarterly meeting had cleared his schedule for family adjustment. He spent part of the morning reviewing emails. The other part? Setting up a bookshelf for Elijah, a project he could have paid someone to do but didn't. By the time Nylea got home from running errands, the living room was covered in instructions, tools, and tiny wooden panels. "This looks chaotic," she said, dropping her keys. Dorian looked up, face slightly smudged with marker. "Elijah decided he wanted to decorate the sides before I assembled it." Nylea laughed. "So, now the instructions are under crayon? And glitter glue." She walked over, brushing a speck of blue off his cheek. "Bold move, Langston. I'm rebranding." That night, Elijah slept early, and for the first time in weeks, Nylea found herself on the couch beside Dorian, not because she had to be there, but because she wanted to. The TV played something neither of them was watching. Their conversation drifted into quiet stories, childhood teachers, strange cousins. The one time Dorian tried to run away from home but only made it to the neighbor's garage. Nylea laughed until she leaned against him without realizing. When she pulled back, he didn't move. "I like this," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Being mocked?" "No, being near you." Her breath caught, not because of the words, but because they weren't smooth. They were honest, a little rough, a little vulnerable. She didn't respond. Instead, she laid her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that until the screen faded to black. The following week brought something new. A letter from Nylea's grandmother's old landlord. The home she once lived in, the duplex, had gone into probate. Her name was still on the original lease, and the owner's family wanted to offer her the first chance to buy it at a discounted rate before it went public. She stared at the paper for a long time. It wasn't just a house. It was where her life fell apart, and where she rebuilt everything. She showed Dorian the letter that evening. "You want it?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then why did you bring it to me?" Nylia hesitated. "Because it's part of who I was." He nodded. "Then maybe it's part of who you're becoming too." He didn't offer to buy it for her. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. And that meant more than any down payment ever could. One night, while organizing old files, Nylia came across the original copy of their marriage contract. The one she'd signed without joy. The one that secured Elijah's future but buried her pride. She stared at the signature block. His name. Her name. A timestamp that now felt like a scar. She found Dorian in the study and handed it to him. He didn't flinch. He tore it down the middle, slowly, deliberately, and dropped it in the trash. "Let's never lead with paperwork again," he said. Nylia didn't smile, but she whispered, "Deal." Later, in the soft hum of evening, Dorian found her in the kitchen drying Elijah's lunch container. He stood behind her, unsure of what to say, so he asked, "Do you ever think about that night?" Nylia didn't turn around. "Which night?" "The first one." She paused. "All the time." He exhaled. "Me too. I hated you after I hated myself." She set the container down. "I thought I was just a moment you needed to forget." Dorian stepped closer. "You were the only moment that mattered." She turned then, eyes searching his. No contracts this time. No media spin. Just truth. He nodded. "No pressure," he said. "But if you ever want to build something more than survival, I want to build it with you." Her throat tightened. She didn't give him an answer. But when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. The first time Nylia wore a wedding dress, it wasn't white. It wasn't satin, lace, or flowing. It was pale grey, mid-length, and zipped up the back. No veil, no bouquet. Just a pressed dress from a designer's showroom that Dorian's assistant had picked out 2 days before the ceremony. It wasn't the kind of wedding a little girl dreams of. There was no music, no aisle, no dancing, only signatures, cameras, and 2 people staring at a judge instead of each other. Now, months later, Nylia stood at the back of a boutique, staring at her reflection in a mirror. She wasn't trying on a wedding dress. She was getting fitted for a gala, a charity event where the Langstons were expected to appear gracious and elegant, as the PR director put it. The gown she wore shimmered in gold under soft lighting. She looked expensive. She didn't feel like herself. "Would you like to see the shoes again, Mom?" the stylist asked. Nylia shook her head. "No, I think I've seen enough." Back at the penthouse, Elijah was on the floor building towers from dominoes. Dorian sat nearby, laptop open, half listening, while Elijah explained how knocking one piece made all the others fall. Nylia stepped in quietly and watched from the doorway. "You think it'll stand?" Dorian asked. "I tested it twice," Elijah said. "But the real test is letting go." Nylia smiled to herself. She wasn't sure if her son was talking about dominoes or life. That evening, they attended the gala as scheduled. Photographers lined the carpet. Dorian offered his arm. Nylia hesitated for a breath before taking it. His touch was warm, firm, familiar in a way she still hadn't decided how to feel about. Inside the ballroom, reporters whispered. Guests stared. But no one dared ask the one question hanging in the air. Were they in love? Because it didn't matter to the cameras. Only the photo did. Only the image of a perfect couple. The reformed billionaire and his once hidden family, dressed like royalty in a world built on performance. They danced once. Slow, unscripted. Nylia didn't say much. Neither did Dorian. But in the way his hand rested gently at her waist, in the way she allowed herself to lean a little closer, something shifted. She wasn't pretending anymore. And maybe he wasn't either. After the gala, the car ride home was quiet. Elijah was already asleep in the back seat with headphones on, drooling slightly against his jacket. Dorian spoke first. "You hate this, don't you?" Nylea glanced at him. "What part?" "All of it. I hate pretending," she admitted. "But I'm not pretending when I'm with Elijah, or when I see you trying with him." He nodded. "That's the only part that feels real." She looked out the window. "Everything else feels like a picture frame. Pretty on the outside, hollow inside." Dorian said nothing. But when they got home, he carried Elijah upstairs without a word. And Nylea knew he'd heard every syllable. That weekend, they skipped the public events. They stayed home. Dorian cooked. Badly. Elijah helped, enthusiastically. Nylea laughed, freely. They built a pillow fort, watched 2 animated movies. And for those 48 hours, no one was a Langston. No one was under contract. They were just 3 people learning how to be something more than strangers. Sunday evening, Nylea stood in the doorway of the study. Dorian was sketching ideas for a new clinic his company was funding in South Carolina. He looked up. "Want to see?" She walked over, sat beside him. He explained each wing: the pediatric center, the women's shelter, the resource rooms. "You're not just doing this for PR, are you?" she asked. "No," he said. "But if people talk, I'd rather they talk about this." She leaned over the blueprints. "You're better at building for others than for yourself. I'm trying to change that." She didn't speak, but her hand moved to his, a silent gesture of encouragement. He didn't let go. That night, Elijah crawled into bed between them without asking. Nylea turned to scold him, but Dorian stopped her with a quiet smile. "Let him stay." So she did. She curled one arm over her son, and Dorian did the same from the other side. In the dark, under soft covers and slower breathing, Nylea whispered something she hadn't allowed herself to say in years. "I don't feel alone anymore." Dorian didn't say anything back, but he didn't move either. And for Nylea, that was answer enough. It wasn't the silence that bothered Nylea anymore. It was how much she'd started to enjoy it. The quiet mornings when Dorian sipped coffee beside her without speaking. The way Elijah hummed while coloring at the breakfast bar. The sound of nothing, finally meaning peace instead of absence. This life she had been contracted into was becoming something she hadn't expected. Home. Still, not everything settled neatly. Nylea was reminded of that when she ran into Marissa Hughes, an old acquaintance from Charleston, at the Children's Museum. Marissa's eyes had widened instantly at the sight of Elijah holding Dorian's hand. "Is that—" "Yes," Nylea had replied before the question could land. Marissa wasn't cruel, but her words still cut. "I just didn't think he would ever show up." Neither had Nylea, and yet here they were, Elijah beaming, Dorian listening, the world still turning. Back at the penthouse, Nylea sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through an old journal. Inside was a list she'd written years ago, while pregnant and alone. "Things I will never allow. A man who chooses power over people. A home where silence replaces effort. A child who grows up, waiting on a father's attention." She traced each line slowly with her finger. Dorian hadn't erased her past, but he was no longer the man that list warned her about. Not anymore. Later that evening, as she folded laundry, Dorian leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You were gone longer today. Ran into someone." He nodded slowly. "Friend? Old neighbor? Judgment?" Nylea met his gaze. Curiosity. Dorian walked over and picked up a pair of Elijah's socks. "Do you regret saying yes to all this?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't regret protecting my son. I don't regret building a life for him." "And me?" he asked, quietly. Nylea looked at him. Her voice stayed soft but clear. "You're still becoming part of that answer." The next morning, Elijah bounced into their room with 2 drawings. "This one's for Dad. This one's for Mom." He handed each to them proudly, then hopped onto the bed. Dorian held his paper carefully. It showed a tall man with square shoulders standing beside a rocket ship labeled Langston X. Nylia smiled at hers, a picture of a woman with curly hair and a glowing crown over her head. "I made you both superheroes," Elijah said. Nylia ruffled his curls. "We'll try to earn that." Later that afternoon, while Elijah napped, Nylia went into the study to find Dorian sketching on his tablet again. She leaned over to peek. It wasn't work. It was a house, not a mansion, not a penthouse. A modest two-story with a small yard and wide windows. "You drawing dreams now?" she teased. Dorian smirked. "Maybe." "Where is that supposed to be?" "I don't know," he said. "Somewhere quieter, less public." Nylia looked closer. "And who's supposed to live there?" His answer was slow, honest. "Us, if you'll have me." That night, Dorian cooked again. It wasn't fancy, but he made everything from scratch. Nylia joined him in the kitchen, peeling carrots while he diced onions. There was no music, no agenda, just a flow between them that didn't need explaining. While setting the table, Dorian cleared his throat. "I spoke with a friend today, someone who owns land near Charleston. Quiet place, lots of trees." Nylia raised an eyebrow. "Looking to build a hideout?" He shrugged. "More like a home. One that doesn't feel like a transaction." She paused, napkin in hand. "You're really thinking about this?" "I think about it every time I see Elijah fall asleep on the couch, or when you hum while wiping counters." Nylia swallowed hard. "You never asked what I want." He stepped closer. "What do you want?" She looked up, eyes tired but calm. "I want safety, I want presence, and I want love that doesn't need legal terms to exist." Dorian nodded. "I want to give you all three." Later that night, as they got Elijah ready for bed, Dorian knelt beside him and whispered something Nylia couldn't hear. Elijah smiled and nodded, then wrapped his arms around his dad's neck. Dorian held him longer than usual. When he finally stood, Nylia waited until they stepped into the hallway. "What did you say to him?" she asked. Dorian met her eyes. "I told him I was proud to be his father, and that I'm still learning how to be a better one." Nylia blinked. "What did he say?" He said, "You're already better than before." Later, when the lights were off and the city glowed in the distance, Nylia lay beside Dorian with her head on his chest. No contracts, no audience. Just the steady beat of a heart that, for once, didn't feel guarded. "You said you wanted to build a home," she whispered. "I did, and if we build it, I'll stay, every day." She nodded once. "Then we start with showing up, one day at a time." And Dorian? He stayed. That night. The next morning. And more days after that than she ever expected. It started small. A shared toothbrush cup. Her slippers showing up in his bathroom. His sweater folded neatly in her laundry basket. A fork missing from one set and appearing in the other. Nylia hadn't moved in with Dorian. Technically, she already lived there. But piece by piece, room by room, her presence became permanent in ways she hadn't agreed to. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. And sometimes, silence said more than anything else. Dorian wasn't rushing her. He didn't push for declarations or affection. Instead, he noticed. He noticed how she hummed while cooking, how she scratched the back of her hand when she was nervous, how she rubbed Elijah's back in circles whenever he slept too deeply. He noticed because he was trying, and she saw that. One Thursday afternoon, they visited Elijah's school for open house. It was a simple event. Folding chairs, art on the walls, juice boxes for guests. But Elijah ran down the hallway yelling, "Mom, Dad, come see my volcano!" As if they were royalty. Nylia stood beside Dorian while their son explained his project in enthusiastic detail. When one of the teachers approached, smiling politely, her tone shifted with interest. "You both must be so proud. He's incredibly bright." Nylia smiled, placing her hand gently on Elijah's shoulder. "We are..." Dorian nodded. "He's everything we didn't know we needed." The teacher tilted her head slightly. "So, How long have you two been married? Nylia froze. Dorian stepped in. Long enough to know we're lucky. On the drive home, they were quiet. Elijah fell asleep in the back seat. Nylia stared out the window, arms folded. She asked about us, she said finally. Dorian kept his eyes on the road. She did. And you answered like it was nothing. I answered like it was real. She looked at him sharply. Is it? He slowed the car to a red light. Glanced over. I'm not pretending anymore, Nylia. She turned back to the window. Neither am I. That's why it scares me. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, the original contract torn and tossed away weeks ago, still echoing in her memory. There was no safety net now. This wasn't performance. This wasn't obligation. This was a man trying to be something different. And her heart learning to believe it. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen, preparing Elijah's lunch, though she'd already made one. I wanted to try today, he said, unbothered by the mess. Peanut butter smeared on the counter. Bread slightly lopsided. She looked at the attempt, then quietly slid her sandwich into a storage bag beside his. Teamwork, she muttered. He smiled. They packed it together. That weekend, Dorian planned a surprise outing, just the three of them. A quiet day at the lake, just outside Atlanta. Elijah skipped stones. Nylia read a book under a tree. Dorian joined her eventually, sitting close, but not too close. You always read romance? He asked. No, she said. Sometimes I like non-fiction. But love stories, they give people something to hold on to. And what about ours? She lowered the book. We're not a story, Dorian. We're real people. With history. With pain. I know. She looked at him, eyes narrowed. Do you? He met her gaze. Enough to want to be part of the future, too. Elijah ran up between them holding a worm. Look what I found. Nylia flinched. Put that down, please. Dorian chuckled. Worm expert in the making. Nylia sighed. If he brings that into the car, you're carrying it. Dorian agreed. And for the first time in years, the sound of their laughter didn't feel like borrowed joy. It felt earned. Later that night, while Elijah slept, Nylia pulled a blanket over him and sat quietly beside Dorian on the couch. I used to wonder if I'd made a mistake keeping him, she admitted. Dorian turned slowly. But every time I heard him breathe, I knew I hadn't. Dorian placed his hand gently over hers. You didn't. You gave me a son I didn't know I needed. She swallowed hard. And what if I give you more than that? What do you mean? She looked up. Me. No contract, no plan. Just me. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned in. No urgency. No performance. Just presence. And when their lips met, soft, slow, honest, Nylia didn't pull away. Because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Nylia hadn't kissed anyone since Elijah was born. Not for love, not for comfort, not even out of loneliness. But that night on the couch, when Dorian's lips brushed hers with intention but no pressure, something deeper stirred. It wasn't the kiss that shook her. It was the fact that she kissed him back. On purpose. She pulled away first. Barely. Her breath was shallow. Her heart too loud in her chest. Dorian didn't move. Didn't push. Didn't smirk like this was something he'd been owed. Instead he waited, watching her, searching for signs that she regretted it. But Nylia wasn't a girl who gave affection without meaning. And this wasn't a mistake. It was a shift. A breaking of the ice they had carefully kept between them. She stood up slowly. I'll see you in the morning. And walked away. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't. The next morning, she found a single white rose sitting in her coffee cup. No note, no noise, just simplicity. And for someone like Dorian Langston, who had always led with grand gestures and calculated offers, simplicity meant something. It meant he was trying, not to impress, but to understand her rhythm. She plucked the rose out and smiled softly to herself, then made 2 cups of coffee. That week, they fell into a rhythm neither had planned for. Dorian took mornings off more often. He sat at the breakfast bar while Nylea packed Elijah's lunch. He helped with pickup when her cleaning team had scheduling conflicts, and every night she found herself inching closer to him on the couch, as if her body remembered safety before her mind could admit it. But healing wasn't linear, and neither was trust. The first crack came during a board dinner Langston Biotech hosted at a private residence uptown. It was meant to be a small affair, donors, advisors, and a few long-time investors. Nylea hadn't planned to go, but Dorian asked. "Just dinner," he said. "No speeches, no cameras." So she agreed. The evening began well enough. Soft jazz played in the background. She wore an emerald dress Dorian hadn't seen before, and his eyes lingered longer than they should have when she walked in. "You look like you don't need to try," he murmured, before opening the car door. "I didn't." At the event, the introductions were polite, some familiar faces, most cordial, until one man, older, sharply dressed, pulled Dorian aside in the middle of a conversation. Nylea didn't catch the full exchange, but she saw the look on Dorian's face shift. And then she heard the words slip out. "Oh, the maid turned wife." Bold move, Langston. Everything stopped. Dorian's jaw clenched. His hand twitched at his side. Nylea didn't wait for him to respond. She walked away, chin high, heart burning. In the car ride home, silence wrapped around them like barbed wire. "I should have said something," Dorian muttered. "You shouldn't have had to." "I didn't invite him to insult you." "No," she snapped. "But you let him." He looked over. "Nylea, I don't need protection. I needed acknowledgement." He swallowed. I froze. She laughed bitterly. "You always freeze when I need you most." Those words stung, not because they weren't true, but because they were. Painfully so. They didn't speak that night. Nylea curled up with Elijah, his breathing soft against her chest, while Dorian paced the hallway outside. She didn't want an apology. She wanted awareness, and she wasn't sure he could give it. The next morning, Dorian stood by the window, phone in hand, already dressed for the day. She walked past him toward the kitchen, but he stopped her. I issued a statement. She turned slowly. "What kind of statement?" "I requested that man be removed from the advisor list. I made it public." Nylea raised an eyebrow. Dorian continued. "It won't erase what happened, but it's not about erasing. It's about showing up." She studied him. Not the CEO, not the man with everything, just the father who made a mistake, and the partner trying to fix it without begging. "Thank you," she said softly, then walked over and handed him a cup of coffee. No more, no less. But it was a beginning again. That evening, Elijah crawled into their bed while they were watching a documentary. He didn't ask. He just curled up in the middle and fell asleep with his mouth open. Nylea rolled her eyes. Dorian smiled. "You think he does it on purpose?" "I think he's smart enough to know we won't stop him." They both chuckled quietly, then fell into silence. This time, the silence wasn't cold. It was peace. Before bed, Dorian turned to her. "I still want to build that house." She blinked. "What house?" "The one you'd choose to stay in, not the one you're stuck in." She studied him. "Then we don't build it with walls, Dorian." He nodded. "We build it with choices." And in that moment, Nylea realized something. She wasn't trapped. She was evolving. And for once, she wasn't doing it alone. Have you ever started trusting someone again, only to flinch when the past crept in? Nylea didn't just fall in love. She chose healing, with caution, with strength, and with a child watching. Tell us in the comments, have you ever given someone a second chance after they let you down? What made you stay? Or what made you walk away? If you felt the weight of Nylea's silence or Dorian's growth, tap that like button. Subscribe to follow this journey of love, rebuilt from pain. Share this with someone learning how to trust again. They may need it more than you know. Real love doesn't rush. It shows up. Again and again. Dorian didn't bring up the kiss again. Neither did Nylia. Not because they wanted to forget it, but because they both understood the difference between a moment and a decision. They weren't rushing. They were building. And building required quiet bricks, not loud declarations. Every morning started the same now. Dorian made the coffee. Nylia packed Elijah's lunch. Elijah always had something to say, a dream to share, a question to ask, a sock he couldn't find. Their mornings were loud and honest, but their evenings, those were softer, slower. They'd started reading with Elijah at night together, taking turns with the chapters. Dorian had a deep, steady voice that made even the silliest story feel important. Nylia would smile quietly when he read aloud, stumbling over character voices but trying, always trying. One night after Elijah had gone to bed, Dorian found her in the kitchen putting away dishes. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You always do that by hand?" "It relaxes me." He nodded slowly. "That explains why you wipe the counters twice." Observant. "I notice more than I used to." She dried her hands and turned to face him. "What else do you notice?" "That you hum when you're focused. That you still wear socks to bed even when it's hot. That you never take the first bite until Elijah has his—" Nylia blinked. And that I think about you even when I don't want to." Her chest tightened. She didn't want to ask, but she did anyway. "Why wouldn't you want to?" Dorian stepped closer. "Because you make me question everything I built without you." She didn't respond right away. She stepped past him, sat on the couch, and folded her hands in her lap. He followed. Sat beside her but didn't touch. "Ask me something," he said. "Anything?" "Anything." Nylia took a breath. "What was your first thought when you saw Elijah? Not as a stranger, but as your son?" Dorian looked away for a long moment, then back at her. "My first thought was, he deserved better than me." She blinked. "My second thought was, I need to earn him." Nylia's eyes welled up before she could stop them. "That's the first real thing you've said since this started." "I have more." She leaned back. "I'm listening." He talked for over an hour. About his father, a man who taught him power but never tenderness. About his childhood, all structure, no softness. About women, none who challenged him the way Nylia did. About loneliness and how he'd hidden behind ambition, convinced it would keep him safe from pain. And when he finished, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Thank you for not dressing it up." And for Dorian, that was enough. Later that night she opened her journal, the one she kept hidden in the bottom drawer of the nightstand. She flipped to a page she hadn't touched in months. A list titled, "What I Deserve, Peace, Laughter, Respect, Truth." A partner who stays. She read the list twice, then slowly added, "A love that grows with me." The next morning, she found a note slipped under her coffee mug. "Tonight. Rooftop, 8 p.m. No phones, just us." It was signed with one letter, D. She folded it in half and tucked it into her pocket without a word. That night, Elijah was asleep by 7:30, exhausted from soccer practice. Nylia wrapped herself in a light sweater and made her way to the rooftop, not knowing what to expect. Dorian stood near the railing, 2 mugs in hand. He handed her one. "Chamomile. No sugar, just like you like it." She took a sip. Warm, calm. He motioned for her to sit. They did, facing the skyline. No words for a while. Just city lights, wind, and breathing. Then he spoke. "You never pressured me. I never wanted to force something I couldn't trust." He nodded. "I want you to know something." She waited. "I still don't have all the answers. I'm still figuring out how to love in a way that doesn't revolve around control. But I think about you more than I used to think about myself." Nylia stared down at her cup. "That's a start." He set his mug down and turned to face her. "I don't want a wife who signs contracts. I want a woman who stays because she wants to." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. He stood up and reached into his jacket, pulled out a velvet box. Nylia's heart stilled. He opened it slowly, not a ring, but a key, silver, Simple. To the house, he said. Not this one. The one we talked about. It's being built. Quiet place. Lots of trees. Close enough to Elijah's school, but far enough from cameras. She looked up at him, stunned. No pressure, he said softly. But if you want a life with me, this is where it starts. Nylia stood, eyes locked on his, then took the key, not as a promise, but as a possibility. And when he reached for her hand, she let him intertwine their fingers. Because hearts don't sign contracts, but they do recognize something real when it shows up. Nylia didn't sleep much that night, not because she was anxious, but because her mind replayed everything Dorian said on the rooftop. The key he gave her lay on her nightstand. It didn't shine in the dark, didn't glow like it held magic, but in her world, that tiny piece of silver meant something bigger than any diamond. It meant freedom, not to escape, but to choose. The next morning, Elijah woke up early. His curls were a mess, his smile crooked, one sock missing. "Are we going somewhere fun today?" he asked, climbing into her lap. She brushed his cheek. "You go to school, remember?" He groaned. "That's not fun." Nylia laughed softly. "Maybe after school, we'll do something special." "Like what?" She paused. "I'll think about it." By mid-morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting mail. Dorian walked in wearing joggers and a plain t-shirt, hair still wet from a shower. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man figuring out his next move. He grabbed coffee, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. "You didn't run from the rooftop last night." Nylia glanced up. "Should I have?" "I expected you might." "Well, I didn't." He studied her for a moment. "I meant what I said. I'm building the house either way, but I want you in it, not just in the rooms, but in the life." Nylia folded a piece of mail and set it down. "Then build it slow, no pressure, no expectations." He nodded. "Deal." That weekend, Elijah had a soccer game. It wasn't official league play, just something casual with kids from school at a local park. Nylia usually sat on the sideline alone, cheering with quiet pride. But this time, Dorian came. He wore sunglasses, tried to stay low-key. But when Elijah scored his first goal, Dorian stood up and clapped louder than anyone else. Nylia turned to him, eyebrow raised. He shrugged. "What? That was an impressive kick." Elijah ran over during halftime, breathless and smiling. "Did you see me?" Dorian knelt down. "I saw everything." Elijah grinned and hugged him. "You're the best." Nylia turned away before either of them saw the emotion welling in her eyes. After the game, they got ice cream. Elijah picked bubble gum and chocolate. Dorian got vanilla. Nylia went with coffee-flavored, her little rebellion against the sweetness. They sat on a bench outside the shop, sunshine warming their skin. Nylia glanced over at Dorian, who was wiping Elijah's face with a napkin, laughing as the boy squirmed. "This," she said suddenly, "is what I didn't think I'd ever have." He turned toward her, brow raised. "A moment like this," she added. "Normal. Simple. Unstaged." He nodded. "I didn't think I'd deserve it." "You don't have to earn peace, Dorian," she said quietly. "You just have to stop running from it." The next few weeks passed in soft, steady strides. No drama, no press, no breakdowns, just life. And for once, Nylia didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. One Saturday, she and Dorian visited the construction site. The new house. It was still beams and sawdust, but the foundation was solid. The rooms were framed. She could already picture the layout. Kitchen near the windows, Elijah's room down the hall, a small reading nook she hadn't even asked for but found carved into the corner. "You remembered I said I like morning light," she said, standing in the future reading nook. Dorian smiled. "I remember a lot of things you think I don't." She stepped toward him. "I don't want this to be something we look back on and regret." "Neither do I." "Then we take it slow as you need." She nodded. And in the middle of sawdust and unfinished dreams, they stood together. Two people learning how to rebuild without tearing each other down. That evening, Elijah fell asleep early after a day full of outdoor play. Nylia sat on the rooftop again, arms around her knees. Dorian joined her. "I'm not afraid of failing anymore," he said quietly. She looked over. "What changed?" "You." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small square of paper. Her old list. "What I deserve." She stared at it, shocked. "How?" "You left it in your book. I read it weeks ago." She went still. "I know I haven't given you all of it yet," he said, "but I read that list and realized you deserve it, even if it's not from me." Nylia's throat tightened. "You're giving it to me now," she whispered. "Then I'll keep doing it. Every day." She took the paper and folded it again, carefully this time, then leaned over, resting her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "This is the first chapter I've ever wanted to write twice." It was a Sunday morning when Nylia realized she hadn't thought about survival in days. No budgeting out each meal, no praying the rent didn't rise, no scanning the corners of Elijah's school shoes to see if they'd last another month. She wasn't scrambling anymore. She was breathing. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel guilty for it. Dorian had started joining them for morning walks. No security, no drivers, no press. Just sneakers, coffee, and Elijah's endless stories about space, insects, and why Pluto deserved to still be a planet. Nylia watched them walk ahead sometimes, her son in the middle, his father quietly matching pace. The man who once disappeared after one night was now Elijah's favorite science partner. Life was strange like that. But healing often came in strange forms. After their walk, they stopped by a small bakery. Elijah insisted on getting a cinnamon roll the size of his face. Dorian gave him half. Elijah pouted. Nylia laughed. They all shared it anyway. Back at home, Dorian pulled Nylia aside in the hallway while Elijah disappeared into his room with sticky fingers and a new book. "I got a call from Elijah's school this week," he said. Nylia raised an eyebrow. "About? They want to skip him a grade." She blinked. "He's 6. "Exactly. They tested him last week. He's operating at an 8-year-old level." Nylia leaned against the wall, processing. "He's always been sharp. He's focused because you gave him stability." "We both did." Dorian paused. "I want to make sure this doesn't pressure him. He doesn't have to prove anything to either of us." Nylia softened. "He knows that. But it's good he hears it from you." Later that night, Nylia found Elijah drawing again at the dining table. She walked over, gently touching his curls. "What you working on?" "A plan," he said proudly. "For what?" "For the new house. I think my room should be upstairs, but close to your room. Not too close, though." Nylia smiled. "Why not too close?" "So I can still have my own secrets." She laughed. "Fair enough." He held up his paper. Crayons had mapped out a house, bright walls, big windows, a sun drawn in the corner. 3 stick figures stood in the living room, all smiling. No labels this time, because he didn't need them. He already knew who belonged where. That weekend, they drove to Charleston. It wasn't a planned trip, more like a quiet decision they made at breakfast over warm toast and soft looks. Dorian wanted to see where Elijah had learned to walk. Nylia wanted to visit her grandmother's old church. Elijah just wanted to see the ocean. So they did all 3. The church was mostly empty that Saturday, but Sister Agnes was still there. Older, slower, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw Nylia. "You brought them," she whispered, pulling her into a hug. Nylia swallowed a lump in her throat. "I did." Sister Agnes turned to Dorian, nodding once. "You were the reason she cried all through service one Sunday." Dorian's jaw tightened. "I probably was. But now you're here," the woman added. "That matters too." Then she crouched, creaking as she did, and smiled at Elijah. "And you, little man. I prayed over your mama's belly for months. Look at you now." Elijah smiled shyly. "I'm fast." She laughed. "And smart, I bet." "I'm both." At the beach, Nylia kicked off her shoes first. Dorian followed, awkward at first, unsure of what to do with sand between his toes. But Elijah grabbed both their hands and pulled them forward. They walked along the shore in silence. Just waves, wind, and the feeling that maybe, finally, they weren't running anymore. Back at their rental, Elijah fell asleep early. Too much sun, too much sugar, too many happy things packed into one day. Nylia stood by the window watching the moon reflect off the water. Dorian stepped behind her, placing a hand at the small of her back. "Thank you for showing me this side of you," he said. "This side was always here." He nodded. "But I didn't know how to see it." Nylia turned slightly. "Do you now?" "I'm learning," he said, then paused. "But I'm sure of one thing." She raised a brow. "What's that?" "I don't want a future that doesn't include this. Us." Nylia let the silence hang, then whispered, "Me neither." That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms, and it wasn't out of convenience, it was choice, because contracts can end. But what they had now, it was just beginning. The morning after their trip, the silence in the penthouse felt different. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't cold, it was peaceful. Nylia stirred awake before Dorian. The soft light filtering through the curtains painted golden streaks across his face. She watched him for a moment, memorizing the way sleep softened his features. He looked human, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just a man who stayed. She carefully slid out of bed and wrapped herself in his shirt. As she walked into the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filled the air. Dorian stood at the counter, alert, dressed but barefoot. He handed her a cup. No words, just warmth. Nylia took it with a soft thank you and leaned against the counter beside him. "You woke up before me," she teased. "I didn't sleep much. Work on your mind?" "No." He looked at her. "You were—" She blinked, taken aback by the honesty. "I kept thinking," he continued, "how different life could have been if I'd stayed, if I hadn't run." Nylia didn't respond immediately, because she had thought about it too, for years. But the past had no edit button, only lessons. "You're here now," she said quietly. He reached over and gently touched her wrist. "Nylia, I meant what I said last night. I want more than this deal." She set the coffee down. "I need to know it's not guilt speaking." "It's not guilt. It's clarity." She nodded slowly. "Then, start proving it without saying it." Later that afternoon, Dorian asked for Elijah's time. No assistance, no distractions. Just a quiet hour with his son at the museum. Elijah returned later, eyes wide, carrying a new dinosaur kit. "He let me pick anything," he told Nylia. "Even the big one." Nylia raised a brow at Dorian. "Bribery?" "No. A trade," he replied. "What kind of trade?" "I gave him a promise. He gave me a chance." Nylia smirked. "You've got my son negotiating already?" Dorian leaned in. "He gets it from you." That evening, Nylia found an envelope tucked under her pillow. Inside, a handwritten note, not typed, not formal, just ink and honesty. "Nylia, I've spent my life fixing things with money, with power, with distance. But there are no numbers for what you gave Elijah, or what you gave me by raising him the way you did. You don't owe me anything. But I owe you a life where you're not carrying everything alone. I'd like to be more than the man who walked away. I want to be the one who stays, on your terms, not mine." "Dorian." She folded the note and sat with it in her lap. She didn't cry. She breathed. Then she opened her phone and texted him 2 words. No more contracts. Weeks passed. Life didn't shift overnight, but it moved forward. Dorian joined them at school functions. He sat through parent meetings, even though he hated sitting still. He started asking Nylia's opinion before making business decisions that affected their schedule. They stopped calling it co-parenting, because it wasn't. It was family. One night, Elijah asked, "Can I call him Dad now?" Nylia froze for a second, then nodded. Only if you want to. The next morning at breakfast, Elijah walked over and said it loud and proud. "Dad, can you pack my lunch?" Dorian dropped his fork. "Say that again?" he asked, carefully. Elijah grinned. "My friends all have one. I figured I should too." Dorian blinked, then stood up, walked over, and hugged his son tightly. "I'd be honored." Nylia watched from the kitchen, hands resting over her heart. They were no longer pretending, and for the first time, she let herself believe. She didn't have to pretend either. That weekend, Dorian booked a weekend getaway. Not flashy, not for show, just the three of them. A cabin in the mountains, board games, firewood, silence broken only by laughter. He made pancakes one morning. They came out lopsided. Elijah rated them a 7 out of 10. Nylia rated them a 10 because effort counts too. Dorian rolled his eyes but smiled. One night, they sat outside under the stars. Elijah had fallen asleep in a blanket fort indoors. Nylia leaned into Dorian's side, head resting on his chest. He kissed her forehead. "You once said I never asked if you wanted any of this," he whispered. She nodded, eyes closed. "Well, I'm asking now," he said. Nylia looked up. "Do you?" She smiled. "I do. Not because she needed saving. Not because of the contract. Not because of guilt, pressure, or timing. But because this time, she was choosing it." The day of the wedding arrived with no thunder, no spotlight, and no pretense. Nylia didn't want a ballroom or a runway dress. She wanted calm, intimacy, honesty, a courthouse in Manhattan, a simple cream dress. Elijah, wearing a tiny tuxedo that made him feel like a superhero. And Dorian, dressed in a navy suit, not the traditional black. "You said you liked me better in this," he told her. They didn't walk down an aisle. They stood side by side, holding hands, while the judge read the vows. Nylia had written her own. "I never thought I'd marry you. Not because I didn't want to, but because I never thought I'd be seen the way you see me now. Not as a maid, not as someone to fix, but as someone to love. Thank you for learning, for staying, for choosing this life." Dorian's voice cracked during his. "You raised my son to be brave, kind, and whole. You did that without me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will never stop earning your trust. I vow to never let this family feel abandoned again." Elijah cheered when they kissed. The three of them went out for ice cream afterward. No guests, no cameras, just the start of something real. Later that week, Dorian called a board meeting. Not to discuss profits. To announce his resignation as CEO. Nylia found out an hour after the meeting when he walked in with Elijah from school and handed her a small gift box. Inside was a gold necklace. A single word engraved. "Oh, we choice." She looked up, confused. He smiled. "I finally made mine. I chose to be present, fully. No more juggling power while trying to prove something to people who never cared." Nylia touched the pendant. "You really stepped down?" He nodded. "Money was never the goal. I wanted control because I was afraid. Afraid of being left, of being small, of not being enough." She touched his face. "You're already enough. You always were." They spent more time as a family. Nylia resumed her part-time nursing course. Dorian took Elijah to school every day. Weekends became sacred. Picnics in Central Park. Quiet evenings with board games. Family dinners filled with jokes and terrible cooking attempts from Dorian. Elijah called them his team. And they were. Not perfect, but honest. One night, as they lay in bed, Dorian turned to Nylia. "If you hadn't needed that job 5 years ago, if we'd never met the way we did, do you think this would still be our story?" She thought about it. "I don't know. But I know one thing. No matter how we started, we chose this ending." He kissed her shoulder. "Then, I'd choose it again." Nylia smiled in the dark. So would she. Because this time, she wasn't the maid. She was the heart of the home. "And Dorian?" He was no longer running. He was home. The morning after, everything felt different. Nylia woke up with her son curled beside her and the faint smell of Dorian's cologne still on the pillow. She hadn't seen him since he kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll be back soon." But it wasn't his absence that gnawed at her. It was the unspoken question that lingered in the silence. What happens next? Downstairs, the apartment buzzed with quiet luxury. Elijah was in the kitchen eating cereal, still wearing his pajamas, and watching cartoons on the sleek kitchen tablet. "Mummy," he grinned, milk on his chin, "can Mr. Dorian take me to school again?" Nylia smiled faintly, ruffling his curls. "We'll see." Truth was, Dorian had already shifted her world once. She didn't want her son counting on a man who still hadn't figured out what he wanted. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dorian. "Ahaye, meeting in 10. Private jet is prepped. Need you with me. Wear the Navy. D. No, please." No question mark. Still commanding. Nylia rolled her eyes, but a blush crept in. He remembered her favorite dress. The jet was quiet, sleek, and stunning. He didn't explain much, only said they were flying to New York for a press event tied to the merger. A family, friendly image mattered more than ever now. But on that flight, something shifted. Dorian reached for her hand without warning, held it gently. No performance, no cameras, just him and her. "I used to think control was everything," he said, watching the skyline from the window. "Then you disappeared, and I realized I controlled nothing that truly mattered." Nylia didn't respond. She just stared at him, and he didn't flinch. The press event was grand. Chatter filled the ballroom. Shareholders mingled, investors smiled, and media flashes came one after the other. Nylia stood beside Dorian in the navy gown, her hair pinned in soft curls. She was poised, stunning, and calm. Elijah, in a little grey suit, held her hand. The room didn't see a contract. They saw a family. Later that night, after the gala, Dorian poured them both a glass of wine in the suite. "I didn't expect you to stay this long," he said quietly. "I didn't either," she admitted. "Do you regret it?" Nylia looked at him. "Do you?" He shook his head. "I regret losing 8 years with my son. I regret hurting you. But this—" He reached for her hand again. "No, Nylia. This is the one thing I don't regret." She let herself lean in, not because of the contract, not because of appearances, but because this time it felt real. The next morning, Nylia stood by the window, watching the sun rise over Manhattan. Elijah snored gently in the next room. Dorian stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What if we let go of the rules?" He murmured, "No timelines, no performance." Nylia didn't answer immediately. Then she turned. "I want a life that's chosen, not scheduled, not signed." He nodded. "Then let's start over. No contract, just us." And for once, Nylia didn't feel like the maid who was left behind. She felt like the woman someone fought to keep. Back in Savannah, months later, Nylia walked through the newly restored West Hall. Estates, now a non-profit home for single mothers, funded by Langston Biotech. Elijah ran ahead, chasing butterflies. Dorian caught up behind her, lacing their fingers together. She looked around at the place where her story began, full of pain, silence, and betrayal. Now, it was full of purpose. Dorian kissed her temple. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Nylia smiled. "I didn't do this for us." She pointed toward Elijah in the distance. "I did it for him. We just happened to get lucky." They watched their son laugh, full of light, full of hope. And finally, they knew. This wasn't the end of a contract. It was the beginning of a real forever. Nylia didn't chase love. She built a life, and love found her in the quiet strength of her survival. Dorian didn't plan on being a father or a husband, but he became both when he chose to stay, grow, and honor what he almost lost. If this story moved you, tap the like button. It tells us you want more stories like this. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances. Comment below. What part of Nylea's journey did you connect with most? And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where every story teaches a lesson and touches the heart. Because sometimes, love isn't perfect, but it's real, and that's enough.